Elizabeth sat alone in her kitchen, staring out the window and watching the trees sway in the wind. Her thoughts were consumed by memories of her son, David, once a kind and thoughtful young man, who now seemed distant and cold. The change had become noticeably apparent. One moment he was loving, the next, he acted as if she were his sworn enemy. This shift in his demeanor seemed to occur solely in the presence of Jessica, his girlfriend, who Elizabeth couldn't help but label as a toxic influence. Jessica's magnetic charm masked a manipulative nature that Elizabeth had started to recognize over the months. When Jessica was around, David seemed to transform. He became dismissive and aggressive, as though Elizabeth were an unwanted presence from his past. Elizabeth remembered their last family dinner vividly. It started pleasantly, with laughter and stories shared across the table. But once Jessica arrived, everything shifted. David's laughter turned into eye rolls, and his warm interactions grew icy. She felt as though she were slowly losing her son to a stranger, a thought that weighed heavily on her heart. Elizabeth decided to seek advice from her close friend Marilyn, a psychologist. Maybe through Marilyn, she could gain insight into what was happening. Over coffee, Elizabeth poured out her frustrations, her confusion, and her heartbreak. "I don't understand," she confessed. "David is a wonderful person, but when he's with Jessica, he behaves as if I'm the villain in his life." Marilyn listened intently and then spoke thoughtfully. "It's not uncommon for someone to change when they're caught in a narcissistic relationship," she explained. "Narcissists often manipulate and control, distorting perceptions and isolating their partners from loved ones. Your son might be under a spell, so to speak, making him see things from Jessica's twisted perspective." The revelation felt like a double-edged sword. Elizabeth was relieved to understand the mechanism behind her son's coldness, yet terrified of how difficult it might be to bring David back to his senses. Marilyn suggested patience and unwavering support. "He needs to know you're there for him, without judgment," she advised. "Eventually, people see through the manipulation, but it takes time and sometimes a crisis." Elizabeth mulled over those words for days, wondering how best to continue loving David without feeling hurt by his actions. She resolved to be patient but vigilant, always leaving the door open for him to return to her unconditionally. Weeks passed, and things were much the same, until one particularly tense evening. David came by without Jessica, a rare occurrence that Elizabeth cherished. As they sat in the living room, a silence enveloped them, but Elizabeth knew she had to break it. "David," she began softly, "I miss the way we used to be. I worry about you and just want to make sure you're doing all right. Please know that no matter what happens or what you think, I'll always be here for you." Her words hung in the air, and to her surprise, David responded warmly, "I know, Mom. It's just complicated right now." Elizabeth sensed a crack in the tension, a small sign that perhaps David was beginning to see beyond the fog shrouding his judgment.